Chapter 1. Shadows in the House I Once Called Home. My name is Elise Garner, and for most of my life I believed pain announced itself loudly. I thought betrayal arrived with screaming matches or slamming doors. I never imagined it could slip quietly into my home, wearing the same smile I kissed goodnight for years. The truth did not break me in one moment. It crept in slowly, in the faint scent of perfume that was not mine, in the hotel receipt tucked inside his jacket, in the uneasy silence that filled our kitchen where love used to live. I spent months convincing myself I was imagining it, that doubt was a flaw in me rather than a warning. But the night $25,000 vanished from my savings and the bank confirmed it came from a device in my own home, something inside me finally woke up. I realized my marriage had not cracked suddenly. It had been breaking piece by piece while I kept trying to hold it together with hope. I did not know it then, but every lie he told, every secret he hid, was already pushing me toward the moment I would reclaim the life he tried to steal. I did not know that realization would follow me into every quiet moment after that. The rain in Seattle has a particular sound when it hits the old windows of my shop, like someone drumming gentle fingers against glass to remind me I am not as safe as I pretend to be. That night I stood alone under the track lights of my little clothing boutique on Capitol Hill, folding the same sweater 3 times just to have something to do with my hands. Outside, the sidewalk was slick and shiny, neon reflected in every puddle. Inside, the register hummed quietly, the scent of fabric softener and coffee clung to the air, and a knot sat right behind my breastbone that refused to loosen. My name is Elise Garner, and at 38 years old, I thought I had finally built something that was mine. The boutique had started as an online shop out of our spare bedroom. Then, 2 years later, it turned into this narrow space with high ceilings and creaky hardwood floors. When the first month of profit came in, I printed the report and showed it to my husband, Daniel Brooks, so proud I could hardly breathe. He barely glanced at the numbers and told me not to get carried away, that a hobby could be fun, but I should not expect it to last. He smiled when he said it, easy and charming, the way he always did when he wanted to soften a blow so I would question my own reaction instead of his words. That was how the small things started. Passwords on our shared bank account changed without notice. When I asked about them, he laughed and said the bank had forced an update and that he would text me the new one later. Sometimes he remembered, sometimes he did not. If I mentioned it twice, he would sigh and ask why I did not trust him after everything we had been through together. It is a strange thing how quickly you can go from certain to apologetic when the person in front of you insists your concern is an insult. We had been married for 8 years by then. Daniel worked as a project manager for a tech company downtown, wore crisp shirts and collected craft whiskey, called himself the responsible one in the relationship because his income had carried us through the early years. I never argued with that narrative. Maybe I should have. Instead, I poured my energy into the shop, quietly shifting more and more of our bills to my account as sales grew. He did not comment on that part. The night everything began to sharpen into focus did not look special. I locked up, pulled my hood up against the drizzle, and drove our aging Subaru back to the small house we rented in the Northgate area. The TV was on when I walked in, some documentary murmuring in the background. Daniel had tossed his suit jacket across the back of a chair. I picked it up automatically, smoothing the shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of his phone and wallet in the pockets. When I slid my hand into the inside pocket, my fingers brushed against something stiff and folded. It was a hotel receipt from a place in downtown Bellevue. 1 king room, 2 nights, charges to our joint credit card. The dates were from the previous week, the same days Daniel had sent me cheerful texts about a client conference that had run late and how he was exhausted but proud of the work. I felt the floor tilt a little beneath me. For a moment, I just stared at the paper as if I could will it to say something else. Then he came out of the kitchen with a beer and a casual smile and asked how the shop had done. I told him I had found the receipt. I kept my voice level, almost bored. His eyes flicked to the paper, then back to my face. He chuckled, said the company had moved everyone to the hotel because of an early morning meeting, asked if he forgot to mention it, made a joke about corporate waste. The explanation came too fast, too smooth. I knew that, but I also knew the way his jaw tightened just enough to warn me that pushing would turn this into a fight that he would win simply by being louder. I folded the receipt and set it on the table between us. I said we could talk about it another time. He kissed my forehead and thanked me for being reasonable. Reasonable. That was a word he liked. So did his mother, Claire Brooks, who called me the free spirit of the family with the tone of someone describing an unruly pet. Claire leaned on Daniel emotionally, relied on him for appointments, and told anyone who would listen that her son had sacrificed so much to take care of her. Jenna mirrored their mother almost perfectly. If Daniel said the sky was green, Jenna would point to the horizon and insist it had always looked that way. They were polite to me, even kind sometimes, but always with a subtle undercurrent that reminded me I was the one who had stepped into their world, not the other way around. There was one place that still felt entirely like mine. 5 years earlier, in 2018, my father had died from a sudden heart attack and left me his cabin near Lake Chelan. It was a small, weathered place tucked among tall pines, with a dock that creaked and the cleanest air I had ever breathed. My father had written my name clearly in the will. In Washington state, property you inherit before or outside of marriage belongs to you alone. When the lawyer explained that, Daniel nodded, said, "Of course," acted like it didn't matter. I remember thinking at the time that it was one of the few things between us that felt absolutely clear. After finding the hotel receipt and pretending to accept his explanation, I couldn't settle. I cleaned the kitchen twice, wiped a spotless counter just to hear the cloth scrape. Daniel fell asleep on the couch with the remote still in his hand. I stood over him for a moment and watched his chest rise and fall, and tried to remember the last time I had felt uncomplicated warmth toward him. The answer would not come. The next afternoon, between customers, I logged into the shop's account. A few numbers snagged at me. A supplier payment recorded 2 weeks ago didn't match the invoice I had in my records. The deposit from the previous Saturday seemed lower than it should have been based on the register tape. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that screamed theft, just small mismatches that could be explained by human error. I told myself that was all it was. Still, I printed the statements and placed them in a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. When I stepped outside to take the trash to the alley, the wind pushed a fine mist of rain against my face. The sky over Seattle was a flat sheet of gray. Car headlights streaked past in muted lines. I leaned against the brick wall for a minute and let the chill sink into my skin. There was a buzzing undercurrent inside me, a feeling I recognized from years earlier when I had worked double shifts in a hospital and gone home knowing something about a patient was off even before the monitors confirmed it. It was the sense that a problem was already growing roots under the surface. I decided I needed space that was not filled with Daniel's cologne or the sound of his voice explaining why I should not worry. After closing, I drove east, out of the city, and along the winding road toward Lake Chelan. The further I got from the skyline, the easier it became to breathe. Pine trees lined the highway, black silhouettes against the cloudy sky. By the time I turned onto the gravel road leading to the cabin, night had thickened around the car. I expected the cabin to greet me with stillness and the faint smell of old wood. Instead, when I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, a different feeling washed over me. The air was warmer than it should have been after weeks of sitting empty. A ceramic mug sat on the counter, still carrying a ring of dried coffee. The heater light glowed softly in the hallway, and on the small table by the window, a blanket I normally kept folded was draped over the back of a chair, as if someone had risen only a moment before. I walked through each room slowly, my footsteps muffled by worn rugs. In the bedroom, I ran my hand along the quilt and felt the faint depression where someone had sat or slept recently. Out by the porch, faint footprints marked the damp boards, shoe prints larger than mine. None of it was dramatic enough to call the sheriff. It was just enough to tell me this place was no longer untouched. I stood in the center of the living room and listened. The cabin creaked and settled the way it always had. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with a low, steady rush. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine faded away. I sat down on the old couch my father had refused to replace, pressing my palms against my knees to keep them from shaking. Maybe Daniel had come up here for a work retreat, I thought. Maybe he had loaned the cabin to a friend without mentioning it. There were explanations that did not involve betrayal, but they all felt thin, like tissue paper trying to hold back water. I let my head fall back against the cushion and closed my eyes. For a long time, I just breathed, counting each inhale, each exhale, letting the unease swell and then settle like a tide. The questions would not stop forming, but the answers were not ready to show themselves yet. In that quiet space, with the rain tapping against the roof and the scent of the lake drifting in through a barely open window, I understood only one thing with absolute clarity. Chapter 2. The Cracks Widen. Back in Seattle, the change showed itself in small ways before it started tearing holes in the surface. A week after that trip to the cabin, Daniel began coming home later than usual. At first, it was an extra 15 minutes, then an hour, then long stretches where I watched the front door like it was a stage and I was waiting for an actor who had forgotten his lines. When I asked how work was, he always gave the same kind of answer: busy, a mess. You would not understand the pressure. He said traffic was worse, meetings were stacked, clients were needy. His smile was quick and tired and landed somewhere above my head, like he was performing reassurance instead of offering it. One Tuesday night, I was chopping vegetables for dinner when his phone rang on the counter. The display showed an unfamiliar number. Daniel picked it up fast and walked into the hallway. I could still hear enough. A woman laughed softly on the other end, that low, easy kind of laugh people use when they want to sound close. Daniel said something I could not make out, his voice turning warm in a way it had not been with me in a long time. I stood in the doorway and listened, knife still in my hand, the smell of garlic in the air. When he realized I could hear him, he stepped into the bathroom and closed the door. The conversation dropped to a murmur. A minute later, he came back and set the phone down like nothing had happened. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just a coworker," he said, asking about a deadline. "You are really wound up lately, Elise." He laughed a little as he said it, like I was the one being ridiculous. I looked at him, at his easy shrug, at the slight flush at the base of his throat, and forced a nod. "Maybe I am," I said. I turned back to the cutting board and felt my jaw clench until it hurt. A few days later, Jenna dropped by the boutique on her way home from work. She browsed the racks, ran her fingers over a silk dress, complimented a display I had rearranged that morning. We made small talk about her office job downtown, about Claire's doctor appointments. It all sounded normal until she leaned on the counter and lowered her voice. "Have you noticed that Daniel has been on edge?" she asked. "He looks exhausted. You might want to be ready for some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door. "I am just saying he's really stressed," she answered. "Maybe give him some space if he's snappy. Do not take it personally." The warning sat between us like a piece of glass. I could see through it, but did not yet know where the edges were. I nodded and said I appreciated her concern. Jenna left with a sweater she did not need and a hug that felt like a half apology she wasn't ready to put into words. Around that time, my boutique started getting an unusual run of online reviews. 1 star, over and over. They weren't about the clothes or the service. They attacked me. Comments about how the owner was rude and unstable, how she gossiped, how she couldn't manage money. The usernames were different, but the phrasing was strangely similar, as if one person had written them all in a hurry while trying to sound like several. I set up a spreadsheet and copied each review into it, noting the timestamps, the locations listed for the accounts, any pattern in the words. I replied politely under the store profile, inviting each supposed customer to contact me directly so I could fix whatever had gone wrong. Not one of them ever did. Every new 1 star felt less like feedback and more like a smear. One evening, I ran into a woman at the neighborhood grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of eggs when she turned the corner with a basket on her arm. She was in her mid-20s, with long blonde hair twisted into a loose knot and a blazer that tried a little too hard to look casual. For a second, we nearly collided. I said sorry out of reflex. Her eyes widened when she looked up and saw my face. "Oh," she said, and then stopped. Her grip tightened on the basket handle. For a moment, she stared at me as if she recognized me from a photograph she wished she had never seen. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Fine," she answered, too quickly. She forced a smile that did not reach her eyes and sidestepped her cart around mine. I watched her go, the back of her neck flushed red. Something about her reaction stuck with me all the way home. The real hit came the next morning. I was in the middle of steaming a new shipment of dresses when my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. "Large withdrawal alert," the subject line read. I opened the app and felt the room tilt. $25,000 had been taken from my personal savings account. Not the joint account, not a business fund, but the one in my own name that I used as a safety net. I called the customer service number and listened to the hold music with my heart lodged somewhere near my throat. When the representative came on the line, I confirmed my identity and asked how the transfer had been approved. "According to our records," she said, "the request came through online using a device that has been authenticated on your profile. The logins match the same IP address that normally accesses your joint account in the evenings." "So, from my house," I said. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. I closed my eyes. "Is there a note on who the funds were sent?" She read off the name of an account I'd never heard of before. It sounded like a consulting business, but returned nothing when I later searched for it. My hands were shaking when I hung up. That day, every memory that I had been filing under minor annoyance stood up in my mind and demanded to be reclassified. Daniel changing passwords, Daniel dismissing my questions, Daniel suggesting I let him handle the serious money because he understood financial risk better than I did. Daniel telling me I was imagining things whenever my instincts flared. For the first time, I looked at the whole picture instead of the pieces. I did not like what it showed me. After closing the shop early, I threw an overnight bag into the car and pointed it east again. The drive to Lake Chelan felt shorter this time, the weeks between visits collapsing into nothing. Clouds sat low on the horizon. The radio murmured softly, but I barely heard it, lost in a loop of his words and my own silence. Dusk was settling by the time I turned onto the gravel road that led to the cabin. The last light streaked the sky in faint orange behind the black line of trees. When I parked and stepped out, the air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. I'd locked the cabin carefully the last time I left. This time, when I unlocked the door, the knob felt faintly warm under my hand, as if someone had held it not long before. The first thing I noticed inside was the smell, not just wood smoke and dust and lake air, but a sharp, sweet perfume that did not belong to me or to any memory of my father. In the kitchen sink sat 2 wine glasses, rinsed but not quite clean, thin crimson rings still clinging to the bottom. On the counter was a bottle of red with a label I recognized from the fancy grocery store where Daniel liked to show off, half empty, cork pushed back in crooked. A jacket I had never seen before hung over the back of a chair, small and stylish, the kind you buy when you care what people notice about your shoulders. I walked down the short hallway to the bedroom. The bedspread was rumpled. On the nightstand lay an empty travel-size container of makeup remover wipes and a foil packet from a hotel brand lotion. My chest felt tight, but my hands were steady as I picked up each item and set it back down. This was not vague anymore. This was not a feeling. This was evidence. Outside on the porch, the boards creaked under my weight as I sank on the top step. The lake was a flat, dark mirror. The wind came off the water with a bite that reached through my sweater and right into my bones. I pulled my knees up and wrapped my arms around them, staring at the faint line where the water met the shore. The blonde woman from the grocery store floated into my thoughts. The way she had stared, the quick flush, the guilty flicker in her eyes. I pictured Daniel bringing her here, unlocking the same door, showing her the same view, pouring that wine like he had poured it for me years before, hearing his laugh echo against these same walls. A part of me wanted to stand up, drive straight back and demand answers. Another part knew exactly what would happen if I did. He would deny, deflect, raise his voice just enough to make my quiet sound unreasonable. Claire would tell me to stop being dramatic. Jenna would look away. The cabin had always been my place of refuge. Seeing it used as a backdrop for his lies cut deeper than any unanswered text message ever could. Yet in that cut was also clarity. I could not unknow what I had seen. I could not unsee how far he was willing to go. The wind gusted, sending a scatter of dry leaves skittering across the porch. I watched them catch in the corners and settle. My teeth were starting to chatter, but I didn't move to go inside. "All right," I said to myself, the words barely louder than a breath. "That's enough." For the first time since the small wrong notes had begun to play in the background of my life, I stopped trying to smooth them over. I sat there in the cold, looking at the dark water and the accusing glow of the cabin windows behind me, and made a quiet promise that whatever came next, I would not pretend this was normal again. Chapter 3. The Truth Unravels. The first sign that Daniel was done pretending came 3 weeks later, on a gray Monday morning that felt like any other until I saw the envelope. I was opening the shop, keys still in my hand, when a man in a blazer stepped inside and asked for me by name. He handed over a thick packet, had me sign a small electronic pad, and left without a word. The return address at the top of the front page belonged to a downtown law firm I did not recognize. My fingers went cold. I sat behind the counter and forced myself to read every line. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage, 27 pages of legal language that turned my life into bullet points. In his version, Daniel was the steady provider who had carried a financially irresponsible wife for years. He claimed I had hidden assets, mismanaged our accounts, and created what he called a hostile environment at home. He wanted a disproportionate share of marital property and spousal support, arguing that my boutique was unstable and that he had sacrificed career opportunities to help me. By the time I reached the end, my hands were shaking, not from surprise at the divorce itself. After the cabin, I knew something like this was coming. It was the way he framed it that made my stomach churn. He was not just leaving, he was rewriting the story so I would be the villain and he would be the victim. That afternoon, I called a number I had been recommended by a customer months before. Evelyn Hart was a family law attorney known for being calm, relentless, and allergic to nonsense. Her assistant squeezed me into a slot the next morning. Evelyn's office was on the 20th floor of a glass building overlooking Elliott Bay. She was in her mid-40s, black, with carefully twisted hair pulled back from a sharp face, and eyes that looked like they had seen every trick in the book twice. She shook my hand firmly and asked me to tell her everything without trying to sound reasonable. I slid the packet across her desk. While she read, I twisted my wedding ring with my thumb until my skin burned. She took a pen and made quiet notes in the margins, lips tightening at certain paragraphs. When she finished, she looked up. "He is accusing you of hiding money," she said. "Has he always handled most of the finances?" "At the beginning, yes," I answered. "When the shop started making real money, I opened separate business accounts. I kept him in the loop, at least I thought I did." "He is framing your independence as instability," Evelyn said. "Classic tactic, and these dates do not add up." She turned the petition so I could see. Her finger tapped a section referencing the cabin and an alleged attempt by me to conceal it. "The property transferred into your name in 2018 after your father passed," she said. "You married in 2016. Under Washington law, that is separate property, not community. The way he describes it here is misleading at best." She flipped to another page. "And this part about you emptying a joint account," she continued, "according to his claims, that happened while he was on a work trip. Do you have bank statements?" I nodded and pulled out the folder I had started keeping. Copies of statements, screenshots of transactions, printouts of the one-star reviews that had appeared right when the withdrawals began. Evelyn studied each page, drawing lines with her pen, circling certain transfers. There are a lot of small pools to a secondary account in his name, she said, and this large withdrawal from your personal savings matches what he accuses you of doing, except he has reversed the roles. We're going to need full disclosure on every bank he uses. I felt an odd mix of fury and relief. Fury that he would lie so blatantly, relief that someone who understood the rules finally believed me. 2 days later, Jenna called and asked if we could meet for coffee. Her voice sounded tight, as if she'd rehearsed the request. We met at a small place near the university, neutral territory with mismatched chairs and the smell of burnt espresso. She showed up in a raincoat too light for the weather, hair frizzing around her face. "Thank you for coming," she said, wrapping her hands around the paper cup even though the drink was too hot. I waited. "Daniel said you're trying to take everything," she blurted. "He says you're lying about money and that you want to leave him with nothing." I stared at the foam art on top of my latte, tracing the heart shape with my eyes. "He's moving money, Jenna," I said quietly. "From our accounts, from my savings. He opened something in his own name and used my information. I have statements, I have a lawyer." Jenna swallowed hard. Her eyes darted away to the window. "I know he's been doing things," she admitted. "He told Mom she'll be fine no matter what happens, that there will be a big check coming and she shouldn't worry. He keeps saying once all this is over, he can finally breathe. When I asked how, he told me to trust him." A humorless laugh caught in my throat. "Did he mention that his plan for breathing involves suffocating me?" I asked. Jenna flinched. "I'm not taking sides," she said, which of course meant she already was. "I just thought you should know that he's promising money he doesn't have. It scared me." "Thank you for telling me," I said. "If anyone asks, you never did." She nodded, eyes glossy. "I'm sorry for what he's doing, for not saying anything sooner." That evening, while I was closing the register, my phone vibrated with a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me swipe to answer. "Hi, is this Elise?" a woman asked. Her voice was soft and familiar from somewhere I couldn't place. "It is," I said. "Who is this?" "This is going to sound strange. My name is Melissa. I think we have a connection we need to talk about. It's about Daniel." For a second, the grocery store aisle flashed in my mind, the blonde woman with the nervous smile. I stepped into the small back office and shut the door. "What exactly about him?" I asked. "Can you meet me?" she said. "In public, somewhere open. I know how this looks. I just found out he hasn't been honest with either of us." Curiosity and dread tangled in my chest. We agreed on a cafe near the waterfront for the next morning. After I hung up, I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the filing cabinet, breathing slowly until my pulse stopped rattling in my ears. Melissa was already there when I arrived, seated at a small table by the window. She wore a navy blazer over a white top, hair pulled back, makeup minimal but precise. Her hands were clasped so tightly around her coffee cup that her knuckles were pale. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I know this is awkward." "Awkward is one word," I said. "Let's see if we can find a few more." A flicker of relief crossed her face, as if my dry tone meant I was not about to throw the cup at her. "I didn't know who you really were when we met," she said. "Daniel told me you were separated. He said you had checked out of the marriage, that you were unstable with money. He made it sound like you were draining him." "That sounds like him," I replied. She swallowed hard. Her eyes darted away to the window. "I know he's been doing things," she admitted. "He told Mom she'll be fine no matter what happens, that there will be a big check coming and she shouldn't worry. He keeps saying once all this is over, he can finally breathe. When I asked how, he told me to trust him." A humorless laugh caught in my throat. "Did he mention that his plan for breathing involves suffocating me?" I asked. Jenna flinched. "I'm not taking sides," she said, which of course meant she already was. "I just thought you should know that he's promising money he doesn't have. It scared me. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "If anyone asks, you never did." She nodded, eyes glossy. "I'm sorry for what he's doing, for not saying anything sooner." That evening, while I was closing the register, my phone vibrated with a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me swipe to answer. "Hi, is this Elise?" a woman asked. Her voice was soft and familiar from somewhere I couldn't place. "It is," I said. "Who is this?" "This is going to sound strange. My name is Melissa. I think we have a connection we need to talk about. It's about Daniel." For a second, the grocery store aisle flashed in my mind, the blonde woman with the nervous smile. I stepped into the small back office and shut the door. "What exactly about him?" I asked. "Can you meet me?" she said. "In public, somewhere open. I know how this looks. I just found out he hasn't been honest with either of us." Curiosity and dread tangled in my chest. We agreed on a cafe near the waterfront for the next morning. After I hung up, I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the filing cabinet, breathing slowly until my pulse stopped rattling in my ears. Melissa was already there when I arrived, seated at a small table by the window. She wore a navy blazer over a white top, hair pulled back, makeup minimal but precise. Her hands were clasped so tightly around her coffee cup that her knuckles were pale. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I know this is awkward." "Awkward is one word," I said. "Let's see if we can find a few more." A flicker of relief crossed her face, as if my dry tone meant I was not about to throw the cup at her. "I didn't know who you really were when we met," she said. "Daniel told me you were separated. He said you had checked out of the marriage, that you were unstable with money."
"He made it sound like you were draining him." "That sounds like him," I replied. She swallowed. "We have been seeing each other for about a year," she admitted. "He told me he was stuck, that he could not leave until some financial things were settled, that you would ruin him if he was not careful." My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice even. "And what changed?" I asked. "A call from my bank," she said. "They flagged some activity tied to an entity I had never heard of. Grant Wellness Consulting. It uses my last name and an address near Lake Chelan. The representative thought I had opened a business account. I had not." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, much like the one I had carried into Evelyn's office. Inside were printed screenshots of transfers between accounts, some originating from our joint account, some from that secret one Evelyn had circled, all passing through the shell company with her name on it. "I confronted him," she said. "He told me it was a paperwork mix-up he would fix, but then I looked closer. He had my signature on forms I never signed. The address listed as a business location is a cabin, right? Your cabin." I stared at the page showing my father's cabin on a form claiming it was an office. "He used my property as a prop," I said quietly. Melissa's eyes filled. "I thought he was divorcing you to start over with me," she said. "I know how that sounds. I believed the story he told, that he was the abused one. But when I saw what he was doing with the accounts, it hit me that he's drowning in debt and trying to pull both of us under with him." For the first time since our conversation started, something like anger directed itself away from her and squarely at him. She had been naive, willing, but she had also been used. "I appreciate you bringing this," I said. "You did not have to." "I kind of do," she answered. "If this explodes and my name is on those documents, I am in trouble too. I already talked to my own lawyer. He said I should gather everything and cooperate if anyone comes asking." "That is good advice," I said. "My attorney is already digging into the accounts. May I show her these?" She nodded and slid the folder all the way across the table. "Use whatever you need," she said. "I'm done with him." When I met with Evelyn later that day, she laid my documents, Jenna's information, and Melissa's folder out across her desk, like pieces of a puzzle. She moved pages around, connecting dates, tracing identical amounts. "He set up this consulting company with Melissa's last name," she said, tapping the heading. "It has no website, no records of actual services, only funds passing through. He used your cabin as a business address, which ties you indirectly to transactions you never approved." She stacked a few statements on top of each other and pointed to them. "Here is your savings withdrawal," she said. "Here are similar amounts pulled in smaller increments from your joint account. Each lands briefly in what should be a legitimate checking account, then gets pushed to the shell company. That's layering, an attempt to obscure the origin of funds. It's sloppily done, but the intent is clear." My mouth felt dry. "So what does this make this, besides a mess?" "At minimum," Evelyn replied, "unauthorized withdrawals, potential fraud, and misuse of personal information. Because he filed a loan using your social security number and tried to shift blame in these divorce papers, we may also be looking at identity-related offenses. This is not just marital misconduct. This crosses into criminal territory." She began drafting a summary on her computer, fingers moving quickly. "I'm going to prepare a preliminary report. We'll send it to the Financial Crimes Unit and let them decide how far to take it. In the meantime, we respond to his petition point by point and demand full disclosure of all his accounts. From now on, every interaction goes through counsel. You do not talk to him alone." A strange calm settled over me. The fear that had sat in my chest for weeks shifted into something harder, clearer. Daniel's betrayal was not personal in the way I had once thought. It was targeted, calculated, predatory. There was no universe in which a conversation at our kitchen table would fix this. That night, after the last customer left and the hum of the city dipped into its quieter rhythm, I walked through my boutique and turned off the lights one by one. The racks of clothes stood in neat rows. The sign in the window reflected my shape as I moved. At the door, key in hand, I glanced back at the space I had built from nothing. The fear was still there, but now it walked beside a new sense of purpose. I locked the door, listened to the solid click, and knew that whatever Daniel had started, I intended to finish on my own terms, with the law and the truth as my weapons.
Chapter 4. The Storm Breaks. The next move did not come from Daniel. It came from a blocked number that rang my phone just after 10 on a Wednesday morning while I was steaming blouses in the back of the shop. I almost let it go to voicemail. On the third ring, I answered. "Miss Garner?" a man said, his voice steady and official. "My name is David Lynn. I am an investigator with the Financial Crimes Division of the State Attorney's Office. I am calling in relation to a report submitted by your attorney, Miss Hart." The steamer hissed against the fabric in my hand. I switched it off. "I am here," I said. "What do you need from me?" "We have reviewed the preliminary documentation regarding accounts in your husband's name," he said. "There appeared to be irregularities worth a closer look. I would like to schedule a time to speak with you and obtain your permission to access full records." We set a meeting for the next day at his office near the courthouse. When I hung up, my knees felt unsteady. I sat on a stool and stared at the racks of clothing, each hanger in perfect alignment. It struck me that every bank statement and screenshot I had handed to Evelyn had now become something more than personal proof. They were part of an official inquiry. Evelyn met me in the lobby before the appointment. She shook my hand, her grip firm. "You are doing the right thing," she said. "Answer honestly, do not guess if you are unsure, and let me step in if anything feels off." Investigator Lynn was in his early 40s with a neat beard and a calm expression that did not soften even when he smiled. He walked us through the process in simple language, no jargon, no drama. He asked about my history with Daniel, who had handled which accounts, when I first noticed discrepancies. He took careful notes. "From our side," he said, "we have already confirmed that your social security number appears on a personal loan application that does not match your handwriting. We also see funds moving in patterns that suggest structuring, smaller transfers broken up to avoid triggering automatic reviews. He slid a sheet of paper across the table showing a list of withdrawals from our joint account. Seeing it laid out that way made my stomach twist again. "Will he know you have opened an investigation?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "For now, we are in the information gathering stage. Once we reach a certain threshold, there will be formal notices. Until then, live your life as normally as you can." Normal had lost its meaning weeks ago, but I nodded. 2 days later, Claire called and asked if I would stop by her condo. Her voice on the phone was tight, thinner than usual. I debated saying no, then decided it was better to hear what she had been told. She met me at the door in a cardigan and slacks, her hair pinned up in the style she had worn for as long as I had known her. The living room smelled like lavender and the faint sourness of old coffee. "Elise," she said, her mouth pressing into a line, "we need to talk about what you are doing." "I assume you mean defending myself," I said. She drew in a breath. "Daniel is under so much pressure," she said. "He tells me you have hired lawyers and are dragging private matters into court. He says you are trying to ruin him. You know he is always taking care of this family." I looked at the framed photos on her mantel. Daniel in a graduation gown. Daniel with his arm around his father, who had died before I came into the picture. Daniel holding Jenna as a toddler. In every image, he was the center. "He has not taken care of me," I said quietly. "He has taken from me. He opened accounts in my name, used my father's property as a front for something ugly. That is not care." Claire shook her head. "He would never," she said. "You are listening to outsiders who do not understand him." From the hallway, Jenna stepped into view. She looked like she had not slept. "Mom, you need to hear this." Claire turned on her. "Not you too," she snapped. "You always take her side." Jenna glanced at me, then back at her mother. "I am not taking sides, but I saw him, Mom, last week. He was in the garage going through boxes of old files. When he realized I was there, he slammed the lids shut. That night, I heard him in the kitchen arguing on the phone with someone. He kept saying she has to sign, or this all blows up." Silence settled over the room, thick and heavy. Claire gripped the back of a chair. "You are misunderstanding," she said, but her voice had lost conviction. I spoke quietly. "He tried to get me to sign documents through Avery. If I had, I would be responsible for his debt. That's what he was pushing for." Claire stared at me, then at the floor. "I raised him better than this," she whispered. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, watching the story she had told herself about her son begin to crack. Then I remembered the text telling me to stop overreacting, to let him breathe, and the feeling cooled. A week later, Daniel showed up at the boutique unannounced. It was midday, customers browsing, music drifting softly from the speakers. He pushed the door open harder than necessary, the bell jangling sharp and loud. "Can we talk?" he said, jaw tight. "We are open. If it's about the case, you should speak to Evelyn." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is ridiculous, Elise. You and your lawyer are blowing misunderstandings into crimes. If you just drop these claims, we can work something out fair. Keep the shop, let me handle the rest." "Fair?" I repeated. "Like the withdrawal from my savings? Like the loan application with my information? Like the cabin paperwork you forged?" Color climbed up his neck. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed. "Those were business moves. You have no idea how any of this works." "If you believe that, you can explain it to the investigator. Until then, anything you want to say can go through counsel." His eyes flashed. "So that's it. You're really going to paint me as a criminal." I held his gaze. "I am not painting you as anything," I answered. "You did that all by yourself." He stared at me another beat, then turned and left, the door slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the glass. 2 customers pretended to examine a rack of jackets, eyes darting between me and the street. I forced a small smile and asked if they needed any help. My voice came out steady. Later that week, Evelyn called with an update. Investigator Lin and his team have pulled more records. Your husband has been moving funds into several smaller accounts at different institutions. They are all in his name or in the name of that shell company. The pattern fits structuring behavior." Her voice tightened on the next part. "They also found a series of invoices issued under a service contract with Melissa. The services appear to be invented. The payments line up with transfers from your accounts. It's essentially fake billing." I thought of Melissa sitting across from me in the cafe, fingers white around her cup. "Does she know?" I asked. "She does now," Evelyn said. "In fact, she contacted the investigators herself. She has agreed to provide a statement in all her records. That will help." When Melissa later called me, her tone was more certain than before. "I talked to them. I told them he used my name without consent. I'm not covering for him. I thought you should know." "Thank you," I said. "You are making it harder for him to twist this." At the shop, life resumed an odd rhythm. I threw myself into work, rearranging displays, planning a spring trunk show, answering emails. Regular customers noticed the dark circles under my eyes and the way I sometimes stared through the front window a little too long. One woman, a teacher who bought dresses from me each semester, lingered at the counter after paying. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. "I'm getting there," I said. The next week, she left a long, glowing review online, not just about the clothes, but about the kindness and care she felt whenever she walked through my door. Others followed. Friends of the shop pushed back against the anonymous one-star comments with their own stories. 5-star ratings started to outweigh the smear. I printed a few and pinned them to the bulletin board in the back office, little paper reminders that my value was not defined by one man or his lies. Word reached me through Jenna that Daniel was not handling the pressure well. He had missed several days of work with vague excuses. He had snapped at Claire during dinner, accusing her of not supporting him enough. He called Jenna late at night, veering between rage and self-pity, insisting everyone was against him. "He keeps saying you're ruining his life," she told me on the phone. "But honestly, Elise, it looks like he did that on his own." One rainy afternoon, as I was reconciling inventory with the purchase orders, an email notification popped up from Evelyn. My breath hitched before I opened it. The message was short. "The judge has granted the state's motion to temporarily freeze Daniel's personal and business accounts, pending further review. This is standard when there is credible evidence of misuse. It protects you from additional withdrawals and preserves assets for potential restitution." I read the sentence 3 times, letting the meaning sink in. For the first time since I'd found that hotel receipt in his jacket, it felt like the tide was finally turning in a direction that did not center his wishes. I set my laptop aside and leaned back in the old office chair, letting my eyes close for a moment. Out front, I could hear the faint murmur of customers, the soft scrape of hangers on metal rods. The world had not magically righted itself. There was still a long road ahead, hearings and paperwork, and likely more attempts from Daniel to twist the narrative. But the momentum had shifted. The damage he could do with a few strokes of a keyboard was finally contained. I opened my eyes, looked at the bulletin board covered with receipts, notes, and kind words from people who had chosen to believe in me, and took a slow, steady breath that reached all the way down to the place where fear had been living for far too long. Chapter 5. The Verdict and the Quiet Aftermath. The hearing date came faster than I expected. One morning in early spring, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in my bedroom, smoothing the fabric of a navy dress that had become my armor. Outside, the sky over Seattle was a soft, dull gray. Inside, my hands were steady. At the courthouse, the hallway outside our assigned courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations. Jenna sat on a bench by the wall, twisting a tissue in her fingers. Claire was beside her, back straight, lips pressed tight. Daniel stood a few feet away with his attorney, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his watch. Daniel did not look at me at first. When he finally did, his eyes were cold. Evelyn touched my elbow. "Stay with me," she said. "Let the paper speak. You do not have to carry this alone today." We filed into the courtroom and took our places. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a low bun and the kind of expression that made it clear she had no time for theatrics. When the clerk called our case, Daniel sat up straighter, like a performer stepping into the spotlight. His attorney spoke first, painting a picture of a devoted husband blindsided by an ungrateful wife. The words washed over me in a blur. He described me as impulsive with money, unstable under stress, prone to wild accusations. He tried to frame Daniel's financial choices as misunderstood efforts to provide. Each sentence felt like a hand pushing my head underwater. Then it was our turn. Evelyn rose and walked through the narrative with calm precision. She did not raise her voice. She simply laid down piece after piece. Bank statements, loan documents with my social security number and handwriting that did not match my own, records from the secret accounts, screenshots of the shell company with Melissa's last name, invoices that paid for nothing real. Investigator Lynn took the stand and explained the patterns he had found, the way funds moved from one place to another and then into small personal accounts. "These are not mistakes," he said. "They form a consistent design to obscure the origin of money and to tie liability to Miss Garner without her knowledge." When Daniel testified, he tried to spin everything back in his favor. He claimed the loan in my name had been an emergency measure to cover a medical bill of his mother's because I had refused to help. He said the transfers were part of a complex investment strategy. He insisted that Melissa had begged him to let her be part of his business because she admired him so much. Under questioning, his stories began to fray. Dates did not match. Amounts shifted. At one point, he contradicted himself within minutes, first saying I had always had full access to every account, then insisting he had locked me out to protect me from my own spending. The judge lifted a hand. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone sharp, "this is not a stage. Answer the questions asked. Leave out the embellishments." He flushed red, but kept going, anger seeping through his polished veneer. "I am trying to destroy me," he said, pointing in my direction. "She found a way to turn my kindness into a weapon. She has been looking for an excuse to run off with her little shop money and leave me holding everything." I felt Evelyn shift beside me. She rose again when the judge allowed it and asked him one final, simple question. "If your actions were so generous," she said, "why did you need your wife's signature to be forged and her property listed as your business address without her knowledge?" He opened his mouth and then closed it. The silence answered for him. Melissa's testimony came next. She sat straight, clutching a tissue in one hand, and admitted in a quiet voice that she had been involved with Daniel romantically, that he had told her he was the victim of a cold, controlling wife. Then she told the court about the call from her bank, the fake consulting company, and the forged signature on documents she had never seen before. I believed him when he said he was trapped. I did not know he was using my name to move money that did not belong to him. When I realized, I ended things and went to the authorities. Evelyn finished by tying everything together for the judge. Unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, fabricated invoices through the shell company, misuse of my social security number, attempts to attach my separate property to fraudulent business ventures. At every step, she said, Mr. Brooks acted to shift risk and blame away from himself and onto Miss Garner. When his actions came to light, he tried to preempt consequences by filing for divorce and painting me as unstable. The evidence tells a very different story. When closing arguments ended, the judge called for a short recess before issuing her ruling. We stepped back into the hallway. I leaned against the cool stone wall, feeling the weight of the morning settle into my limbs. Jenna approached first. "Are you holding up?" she asked. "I am here. That is enough for now." She nodded, eyes full of conflict. Claire was beside her, back straight, lips pressed tight. Daniel stood a few feet away with his attorney, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his watch. Daniel did not look at me at first. When he finally did, his eyes were cold. Evelyn touched my elbow. "Stay with me," she said. "Let the paper speak. You do not have to carry this alone today." We reconvened in the courtroom and took our places. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a low bun and the kind of expression that made it clear she had no time for theatrics. When the clerk called our case, Daniel sat up straighter, like a performer stepping into the spotlight. His attorney spoke first, painting a picture of a devoted husband blindsided by an ungrateful wife. The words washed over me in a blur. He described me as impulsive with money, unstable under stress, prone to wild accusations. He tried to frame Daniel's financial choices as misunderstood efforts to provide. Each sentence felt like a hand pushing my head underwater. Then it was our turn. Evelyn rose and walked through the narrative with calm precision. She did not raise her voice. She simply laid down piece after piece. Bank statements, loan documents with my social security number and handwriting that did not match my own, records from the secret accounts, screenshots of the shell company with Melissa's last name, invoices that paid for nothing real. Investigator Lynn took the stand and explained the patterns he had found, the way funds moved from one place to another and then into small personal accounts. "These are not mistakes," he said. "They form a consistent design to obscure the origin of money and to tie liability to Miss Garner without her knowledge." When Daniel testified, he tried to spin everything back in his favor. He claimed the loan in my name had been an emergency measure to cover a medical bill of his mother's because I had refused to help. He said the transfers were part of a complex investment strategy. He insisted that Melissa had begged him to let her be part of his business because she admired him so much. Under questioning, his stories began to fray. Dates did not match. Amounts shifted. At one point, he contradicted himself within minutes, first saying I had always had full access to every account, then insisting he had locked me out to protect me from my own spending. The judge lifted a hand. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone sharp, "this is not a stage. Answer the questions asked. Leave out the embellishments." He flushed red, but kept going, anger seeping through his polished veneer. "I am trying to destroy me," he said, pointing in my direction. "She found a way to turn my kindness into a weapon. She has been looking for an excuse to run off with her little shop money and leave me holding everything." I felt Evelyn shift beside me. She rose again when the judge allowed it and asked him one final, simple question. "If your actions were so generous," she said, "why did you need your wife's signature to be forged and her property listed as your business address without her knowledge?" He opened his mouth and then closed it. The silence answered for him. Melissa's testimony came next. She sat straight, clutching a tissue in one hand, and admitted in a quiet voice that she had been involved with Daniel romantically, that he had told her he was the victim of a cold, controlling wife. Then she told the court about the call from her bank, the fake consulting company, and the forged signature on documents she had never seen before. I believed him when he said he was trapped. I did not know he was using my name to move money that did not belong to him. When I realized, I ended things and went to the authorities. Evelyn finished by tying everything together for the judge. Unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, fabricated invoices through the shell company, misuse of my social security number, attempts to attach my separate property to fraudulent business ventures. At every step, she said, Mr. Brooks acted to shift risk and blame away from himself and onto Miss Garner. When his actions came to light, he tried to preempt consequences by filing for divorce and painting me as unstable. The evidence tells a very different story. When closing arguments ended, the judge called for a short recess before issuing her ruling. We stepped back into the hallway. I leaned against the cool stone wall, feeling the weight of the morning settle into my limbs. Jenna approached first. "Are you holding up?" she asked. "I am here," I said. "That is enough for now." She nodded, eyes full of conflict. Claire stood a few feet away, staring at a framed print on the wall as if it contained answers. After a moment, she walked toward me, moving as if the air around her had thickened. "I saw the papers," she said quietly. "All those transfers, the loan, the way he used your father's cabin. I kept thinking there must be some explanation. I do not have one anymore." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. "I told myself my son could not do something like this," she continued. "I told myself you were overreacting. I was wrong." Her shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. "I am sorry, Elise," she said. "I know that does not fix anything, but you deserved better from all of us." The words were soft, but they landed heavy. Some part of me that had been braced for her to cling to denial loosened just a fraction. "Thank you," I said, "for saying it out loud." She nodded and stepped back, as if unsure what else she was allowed to offer. We reconvened in the courtroom. The judge took her seat, glasses perched on the end of her nose. She spoke clearly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. She found that the evidence supported my claims. The accounts and documents demonstrated a pattern of deception by Daniel, not by me. She ruled that all assets clearly tied to my work and my inheritance remained mine entirely. The boutique, the business accounts, and the cabin near Lake Chelan were confirmed as my separate property. The large withdrawal from my personal savings was to be repaid from any remaining funds in Daniel's frozen accounts. Responsibility for the fraudulent loan and any associated penalties belonged to him alone. In addition, the judge said, given the findings presented by the Financial Crimes Division, this court will be forwarding the full record to the appropriate prosecuting authority for review of potential criminal charges against Mr. Brooks. Daniel made a choking sound at that, half protest and half disbelief. "You cannot do that," he burst out. "She set me up. She and that accountant and that other woman, they all planned this." His attorney put a hand on his arm, hissing his name under his breath, but the damage was done. The judge fixed him with a hard stare. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "you have had ample opportunity to present your version of events. The documents speak louder than your accusations. If you continue to disrupt these proceedings, I will hold you in contempt." He fell silent, chest rising and falling too fast. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes, not anger masquerading as superiority. The rest of the formalities passed in a blur. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse flanked by Evelyn and Jenna. The air outside felt strangely fresh, as if the city itself had exhaled with me. Melissa was waiting near the steps. She gave me a tentative nod. "Looks like they believed you," she said. "They believed the paper," I answered, "and they believed you. Thank you for telling the truth." She shifted her weight, looking both ashamed and relieved. "I hope you get your life back. I am trying to rebuild mine too." We parted with a brief, awkward half-smile, two different casualties of the same man heading in separate directions. That evening, I returned to the boutique. The lights glowed warm through the front windows as I approached, the sign with my logo swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it. Racks in place, plants in the window, a stack of new arrival boxes waiting to be opened. I walked slowly through the space, touching a sleeve here, straightening a hanger there. For years, this shop had been my dream and my distraction. Now it felt like my anchor. In the back office, I sat in the same chair where I had once cried over that first bank notification. The bulletin board still held the kind reviews, the notes from customers, the scribbled reminders from busy days. My reflection in the small mirror looked tired but clear-eyed. I thought about what revenge really meant. Daniel would face consequences. He might lose his job. He might be charged. He would live with the record of what he had done. But as I sat there, I realized that none of that was the part that satisfied me most. The real victory was quieter. It was knowing that he had not succeeded in turning me into the broken, frightened version of myself he needed me to be in order to keep control. It was having my name cleared on paper and in my own mind. It was walking into my life without the weight of his lies pressing down on every decision. I locked up later than usual that night. The street outside was damp and reflective, neon smearing across the pavement. As I turned the key and felt the deadbolt slide into place, I let myself breathe in that moment of stillness. If you're still here listening to this, somewhere in your own kitchen or car or quiet room, maybe something in my story sounds too familiar. Maybe you have felt someone slowly tighten their grip around your money or your sanity and then tell you that you were imagining it. Maybe you've convinced yourself that keeping the peace was more important than trusting your own eyes. I can't tell you what to do. Every life is different, every risk its own weight. I can only tell you that the day I stopped pretending things were normal was the day I started getting my life back. The law didn't fix my heart, but it did give me tools to draw a line and say, this part is mine, and you don't get to touch it. So if any part of this makes you think of your own story, sit with that for a moment. Ask yourself what you would have done in my place and what you are willing to do in your own. And if you feel like sharing, if you have a story of your own storm and your own quiet aftermath, I'm here, listening the way you have listened to me.